Hello, everybody. I'm glad you came to hear my stories about landmarks. Landmarks are physical things, but sometimes they can be emotional as well, and that is true in my case. I have 3 stories for you. The first one has to do with my hometown having a Facebook page called Bethlehem Days Gone By. And on it, people, well, mostly seniors, post pictures of places they're sentimental about, like the playground where they played box hockey, and the movie theater that burned down, and the bowling alley, and their favorite hot dog and pizza places, and maybe even their backyards, or pictures of their houses and their birthday parties when they were 6. And then other people respond and make comments. Well, I left Bethlehem right after college, and I haven't lived there in over 50 years. So a lot of the pictures don't do anything that I don't even know where some of the places are, because Bethlehem's a big city. But once in a while, I'll see something, and I'll be happy that I did. And one day I saw something that really, really shook me. It was a picture of an old bar. And people were responding to it with comments like, best hamburgers ever, and I worked there when I was in college, and I met my wife there. And I wanted to comment too, but Lord, I'd have to write a book, because I had a connection to that bar, a real connection that had to do with my father. Now, my father and I, we didn't talk much. We never spent time together, because my dad worked at the Bethlehem Steel nights from 11 to 7. And then he came home, ate breakfast, and he went out in the morning, and he had a small carpentry business. He was the kind of guy who would remodel your kitchen or build your garage. He was mostly a one-man band, and if he needed help, he'd hire one of my mother's brothers, like Emil or Gusty or Georgie, or one of my older cousins, like Joey or Franny. And that's how he got around. He didn't do much of big jobs or nothing commercial ever. And occasionally over time, I've been regretful that I never learned how to use power tools or learned anything about carpentry, because, hey, it was all in my backyard, in my garage that my father used as a workshop. But I can't blame my father. I know where he was coming from. It was the 50s, and I was a girl. Girls didn't do tools. And it's partly my fault, because I never asked. Why would I ask? I was a girl. When it came to me learning something, I was sent for sewing lessons, which I took for a long time. The only time I got called out to help my father was when he needed somebody to sweep up the sawdust, because that's what girls did. Let's go back to that bar. It sits on a triangular-shaped piece of property, an isosceles triangle with 2 long sides and a rounded point. And in 1962, to my knowledge, it was owned by a man named Ripper Rich. That's the only name I know. That's what my father called him. And Ripper wanted to remodel the building into a bar, an English pub. That was a new thing back then. Well, some of it wasn't that hard. I mean, you stuccoed the long white sides, and you got 2x4s and painted them brown and gave it a Tudor look. And there was actually a way to paint the windows to make them look like stained glass. But Ripper wanted something really special for a sign. On the front of the building, he wanted a barrel. He wanted a barrel protruding from the point of the building. It was a huge barrel. It was 7 feet off the ground, and maybe 6 feet high, and maybe 12 feet wide. And if you imagined a barrel that big, you would probably see about 60% of it hanging from that building. And Ripper Rich needed somebody to build it. And, well, he couldn't go to Home Depot or Lowe's or the internet. There was Brown Boric, but they just sold lumber. He needed to find somebody who was a craftsman, who knew how to use tools and knew math and could make your idea come to fruition. He needed an artist. And Ripper Rich found my dad. And I don't know where. I just hope it wasn't on a stool of a bar somewhere. And my father began to build the barrel in the garage at my house, 618 Forest Street. And I was called out occasionally, handed the broom, and asked to sweep up the sawdust. Well, one day my father called me, and I got the broom and I went out, and he said, "Betty Ann, I need you to do something for me. I need you to make me these letters, you know, those fancy letters, the kind that's like in the Bible, those letters, they're funny looking. You know what I mean, the fancy ones, like they had in England, you know." I didn't know. And then he said, "You make the letters, and I want them, the capitals to be like 12 inches high, and the lowercase letters should be," I bet he didn't say lowercase, I bet he said little, "about 8 inches high, and 2 inches wide. They all have to be 2 inches wide. Go to the library or something. Go, do it." And off I went to the library, where the librarian helped me find a book of fonts. I took it home and I showed my father, and he found what he was looking for. And then I got a pencil and a big eraser, maybe a ruler. And I don't know what kind of paper I used. It might even have been shelf paper or newspaper, because we didn't have a lot of paper at our house. And then I sat down and I sketched all the letters in the name of the bar. And when I finished, I cut them out, and my father took them and put them on a piece of plywood and cut them out on his jigsaw. And I remember that he bought the jigsaw specifically for making these letters. He painted them white and put them on the barrel, and the Ye Old Ale House was born. And I didn't feel especially proud of what I had done. It was just something my father asked me to do. I didn't point it out to all my friends or anything like that, because it was my senior year in high school. I had other things on my mind, like the prom, because I was a girl. It took me years to think about it and realize that my father and I did have something in common that was very special. We're both craftsmen. We both know how to use our tools. We both can do math. We both can make your vision come true. We're both artists. Only my dad worked in lumber, and I work in fabric. The barrel's still up there. It really looks like it's on its last legs. I hope it stays around for a long, long time. Thank you. My second story is like part 2 of part 1. If you didn't hear part 1, well, part 2 might not be as special as it is to me. But I live in Tennessee now. I live close to Jonesboro, Tennessee, which today is actually celebrating the 225th year of the statehood of Tennessee. And they're having it in Jonesboro because Jonesboro is said to be the oldest town in Tennessee. Jonesboro looks old. It's a historic town, and it has a historic district. And my hometown, Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, is also an historic town and has an historic district. And both districts are pretty much the same size, except Jonesboro feels older because it's out in the country. It's not crowded in. Whereas in Bethlehem, the historic district is surrounded by a big city, and you just have to go around the corner and you're out of it. But they both have brick sidewalks and brick streets. They have lantern street lights. They have old churches, old storefronts. They both have log cabins. And Jonesboro says Andrew Jackson slept here, and Bethlehem says George Washington slept here. So I can see that they're the same, but I want you to know that Bethlehem has something. Bethlehem is 60 years older than Jonesboro, and it has something else to brag about. Bethlehem, Pennsylvania has the oldest long operating bookstore in Pennsylvania, the United States, and the world. The Moravian Bookshop. It was started by the Moravians and is still doing business today, although it was recently bought by Moravian University, and it may be a college bookstore now. I haven't been there since, but my story takes place back in the late 1990s. Well, there was the Moravian Bookshop, and I walked past it many a time on my way to the movies at the Nile or the Boyd. I never went in. If I needed a book, well, I just went to the library. I didn't come from a book-buying family. Anyhow, it wasn't until my daughter, my youngest, went to Moravian College at the time. By the way, Moravian College is the 6th oldest college in the United States. And she would say to me, "Mom, let's go down Main Street. There's some good coffee shops and bagel places, a couple of good restaurants and some neat stores. Let's go down there and walk around." And so that's when I became acquainted with the Moravian Bookshop. Now, the Moravian Bookshop probably was it was 2 stores combined. It's not huge, but 2 of those narrow old stores combined. And one half of it, and one half was a bookstore. And the books that they sold there when I was there were books about the history of Bethlehem, the history of the Moravians, the history of the Bethlehem Steel, books on the processes of how to make steel, books about Lehigh University and Moravian College, and books about the waterworks, which the waterworks was the first pumped water system for a municipality, probably in the United States. Anyway, that was the book session. Oh, they had children's books there, ones that won the Caldecott Award or the Newbery Award, and they had toys. They had a line of Melissa and Doug toys. And I hope that I'm giving you a little bit of an impression that the Moravian bookstore was upscale, because it was. In the back, they had a coffee shop, and I remember them selling specialty chocolates out of a case. And then the rest of the bookstore was actually a gift shop. The main thing they sold in the gift shop was Moravian stars that look like this. Now, every self-respecting person who lives in Bethlehem has a Moravian star on their porch or in their vestibule. And you could buy Moravian stars in the Moravian Bookshop at that time, made of plastic or leaded glass for several $100s. The other things they had were typical of the same things you see at Mock's store in Jonesboro. Maybe tea towels or other tchotchke kind of things, or ashtrays, or they still sell ashtrays? Well, lamps, things that you would like to have around your house. But frankly, when I went in there, I was on my 3rd kid going through college. The only things I could afford was a postcard and a magnet. But this one day we were in there, and one side wall was a patchwork of picture frames. There were about 10 pictures butted up against each other and 4 rows, maybe 40 pictures. And they were all pictures of landmarks in Bethlehem. It was the Hotel Bethlehem, the Sun Inn, the waterworks, the old storefronts, the graveyards, the parks, the canal, all things. And mostly they had pictures of these beautiful, stately homes that were built by mostly Bethlehem Steel executives and now owned by doctors and lawyers. Beautiful pictures. Any one of those pictures would look gorgeous above my fireplace. But besides not being able to afford one, I didn't really want one because I didn't feel a connection to it. You know, I like to have a connection to the art I put in my home, and I didn't have a connection to any of these things. I'd never been inside the Moravian church. At that point, I'd never eaten at the Hotel Bethlehem or had a drink at the Sun Inn. And I never even sold Girl Scout cookies door to door to any of those stately homes. You see, I grew up on the other side of the hill-to-hill bridge. Now, the hill-to-hill bridge, living on the other side, was kind of like saying you lived on the wrong side of the railroad tracks. It wasn't that bad, but that's where all the people came to work, the immigrants came to work in the Bethlehem Steel. And they lived in row homes that were packed in and went up the side of South Mountain. My grandparents' parents started out on Mechanic Street, which was right near the railroad. My grandfather managed to take his family to Fountain Hill, which is a suburb, but it's still on the other side of the hill-to-hill bridge. My father also took us to Fountain Hill and bought a small Cape Cod. It was only 2 bedrooms, but hey, it was a single-family home. But none of these pictures, none of these landmarks meant anything to me. And as I just looked at one or another, all of a sudden I saw one, and I was speechless. First time in my life I was speechless. I couldn't talk. I grabbed my daughter and I pointed. Look, what, Mom? Look, It was a picture. It was kind of large. It was a watercolor. It was a print, and it was called The 5 Points. And the 5 points was on the other side of the bridge, on my side of the bridge. And when I think about it, before there was a thruway or a turnpike or that god-awful 22, there was the 5 points. And if you wanted to go anywhere, you had to pass through one of those streets. If you went south, up the Wyandotte Hill and over the mountain, you could head south to Philadelphia. If you went north across the hill-to-hill bridge, you could make your way to New York. If you went west, the street was called Broadway, and it led you to the borough of Fountain Hill, where I grew up. There was another skinny little small street that was kind of a shortcut to the hospital. It wasn't very long. But if you went east, you actually went down to what we called the south side of the river, where the Bethlehem Steel was. And I looked it up, and I read that the Bethlehem Steel either had 30,000 or 60,000 people working there at one time. Can you imagine how busy that intersection was? There was even a traffic cop who helped you cross the street. I remember because I walked that intersection when I went to high school. And now here I was looking at that picture of the 5 points. And right smack in the middle of the picture was none other than the ye old alehouse. Now, I know you can't see it that well from here, but there it is. And it just bowled me over that the barrel was built by my father, a first-generation American who didn't finish high school. Son of an immigrant, had made a landmark a landmark that was hanging in the Moravian Bookshop. I was one proud lady. I ran home to tell my dad. My dad at that point was old and frail, and I told him all about it, but I don't know that he could make it to the bookshop and see the picture, but I wanted him to know it was there. I was sorry that we didn't have phones back then because I couldn't even take a picture. But I know he knew what I was talking about, because that year for Christmas, my present didn't fit under the tree, but it looks really nice on my mantle. My final story about landmarks in Bethlehem is the story of the Indian Maiden. And there's been a lot of interest about her lately on Facebook. So I need to make a couple of caveats here and tell you that this story comes mostly from my memory, from a little bit of research. And if you want to do some research, all you have to do is Google Indian Maiden, Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, and you'll find out what I found out. You'll hear names there. I'm not going to mention any names. And also, of course, I put my storyteller's twist on it. And there's one more caveat. In 2021, you don't call Native Americans Indians. However, the Indian Maiden statue has been called the Indian Maiden statue for over 70 years. And to be true to the story, that's the name I have to give her. I call this story the life story of a lawn ornament. When I was a little girl, and we rode up Wyandotte Street over the top of South Mountain, my mother would yell and she'd say, look out the window, you'll see an Indian girl and she'll wave to you. And depending on how quickly I could get my act together, I might see an Indian girl and she might wave at me. But a lot of times I missed her, and I kind of wondered if she went in and out of the house. But eventually I got good at the game. You know, that's what it was. It was a 1-minute game that my mother played with us back when children actually looked out the window instead of at their phones or their other devices. I got good at the game because I learned to recognize the house she was next to. So if I looked for the house, then I knew when to turn my head and I would see her. It was a fun thing to do. The Indian Maiden was made at the Universal Concrete Company, which was at the top of South Mountain. And I know I remember going past it because I remember seeing the concrete animals on the side of the road. There were deer, and there were bears, and there were rabbits and sheep and angels. I looked out the window when I was a little girl, but it's long gone now. It was said that the Indian Maiden had a twin sister, but she took herself off to the Poconos to stand by Lake Wallenpaupack, and nobody's seen her since. Our Indian Maiden, she only made it maybe a mile back down Wyandotte Hill to 1001 Wyandotte Street. Now, the houses on Wyandotte Street were literally built into the side of the mountain. On the high side, the houses had 12 steep steps that you had to go up in order to get to your front door. On the other side of the roadway, where the Indian Princess was, you had to go down steps. Now, the house at 1001, what they did was they built a garage. It was attached to the building, and it had a flat roof. And that flat roof was even with the roadway. So I guess it was concrete. They used it as a patio. And the owner went out and purchased an Indian Maiden lawn ornament for his deck. Now, it could be said that he wanted to pay tribute to the Wyandotte Indians, who, it is said, befriended the Moravian settlers when they came, and the Wyandotte Indians protected them from other Native American tribes. So he could have had high motives, or he could have just wanted a unique lawn ornament. And if you were playing my game that I mentioned before, the statue didn't stand right next to the road. She sat on the opposite end of the garage with her back to you because she looked down over the valley. She looked down over Fountain Hill and Bethlehem and the hospital in the distance and even the bridge way out there. And what made her special when I read about her was if the artist created her in a moment, in a special moment that we all know. She's standing there and she's looking, she's searching. She could be searching for a hunting party, waiting for it to come back, or some little kids who ran off somewhere and she wants them to come home. Or as the people in Bethlehem like to say, she's looking for a boyfriend. Maybe she is looking for her special brave. I don't know, but it's a special moment, like when you come off an airplane or you meet somebody at the airport. When you see that person, you put up your hand and you wave. That's what the Indian Maiden's hand is doing. It's waving at somebody, somewhere. She's waving hello. Just like if you go to a sporting event or a concert and you're waiting for your friends or your family, and oh yeah, you have the phone next to you and you're telling them where you are. But when you see them, you both wave in recognition. And it's a special moment and it's a happy moment. And sometimes when families get together, that's the happiest moment there is, because things can go downhill after that. But there she stood in that special moment for decades, until the 1970s, when by then, somehow, and I don't know how, she broke her arm. Now, that special moment is gone. It isn't a story anymore, but it's just an Indian maiden looking out over the valley. Maybe she's watching the trees turn colors or watching the snow fall. It's still not bad. And then in 1974, thieves tried to steal her. I don't know who would want to steal a statue with a broken arm, but it could have been some Lehigh University frat boys doing some pledge. Or maybe some Liberty High School kids just pulling a prank. But whoever it was didn't factor in that she weighed a couple of 100 pounds, and they were unsuccessful. But the episode caused the owner to take stock of his lawn ornament. It was faded, broken arm, chips. He decided that he would refurbish her, and he went so far as to secure the mold so that he could make a new hand for her, a new arm. And then he decided to put her in the basement so he could work on her. And you and I know what happens to that old desk you're going to refinish, or that other little project you had once it goes into the basement. Out of sight, out of mind. And the Indian Maiden was in the basement for 20 years. Most of the time in the dark. What was she looking at? Boxes, old tires, a mouse? In 1997, the owner decided to sell the building. And there's some discussion about a little joke that went on, because he said if he moved, he would take the Indian Maiden with him because he was partial to her. And then the joke goes on that the new owner said, well, if I don't get the statue, there's no deal. And so the statue stayed. But the new owner had plans for her. He decided to take her and put her in front of his business so that she could greet customers. And there she stood at the doorway to an asphalt paving business. Sometimes she wore a funny hat and had a few extra feathers stuck in her head, or she had a flag of some kind. I don't know how she felt about that, but in 2021, I feel it was disrespectful, but it was way back in 1997, so anyway, his customers recognized her. They remembered her. They remembered her from, like me, from being a little kid and playing the game of seeing the Indian girl waving her arm. And more importantly, like me, they remember when they went on a trip and they came home from the shore or someplace far away, and they came up South Mountain and they got to the top and they started to come down, and they'd look over and they'd see the Indian Maiden, and it was as if she said, "You're home. You're back in Bethlehem. This is your home." She was a landmark. She was special to a lot of people. And the owner decided that she was in the wrong place. And he got that mold of her arm, and he had it made, and he had it reattached to her body. He hired two painters, a man and a woman, and they took chips from her paint to get the color of her skin and her hair and her dress the right shade, and they repainted her. And then he secured her back up on the roof where she stands today. And the next time I go home to Bethlehem, I'm going to go up over that mountain and see her and know I'm home. And that's the story of the landmark. I appreciate everybody who came tonight to watch me. And special thanks to the Lehigh Valley Storytelling Guild. Good night, everyone.